Good morning, and well, howdy, as they say in Texas. But no. It's a real pleasure. We're at day 3, but it's going to be really exciting today, as you already heard. So we have David Hutchinson is a quantum physicist and professor at the University of Otago in New Zealand. But importantly, he's the inaugural director of the Dodwell Center for Photonic and Quantum Technologies, which is a government-funded national center of research excellence in New Zealand. And he served really in that role from January 2015 through the end of March 2023. And this is a very important center. It was also very integral to the Year of Light in 2015, and it's also a partner this year with the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. So his research interests are in the area of ultra-cold atomic physics, quantum biology, and underlying mathematics of quantum physics. He's also a chair of the board of the Otago Museum and was department science advisor for New Zealand's Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. So he's won a number of awards. He's a passionate practitioner of education outreach, giving regular talks at schools and community organizations, which I can only recommend for everybody. He's really been involved all across New Zealand, but not only, also in the Pacific Island nations. And he's another passion is the interface between arts and science, and he was involved in the recent Quantum Crossroads event as part of the UNESCO IYQ activities. So he's going to talk to us about cutting-edge research being essential for emerging economies, and the future is in our people. So we're going to show the video, and David's online for questions afterwards. So please go ahead.
Kia ora, and thank you for having me at this global education event on quantum science and technology. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. It would be even better if I was there in person. I'd love to visit, but I guess that's going to have to wait for another time. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about today is, well, the title is Cutting Edge Research is Essential for Emerging Economies. And so really what I'm going to be talking about is, why does New Zealand invest in quantum science and technology, and what is the return on that investment? Why should we be worrying about investment in quantum science and technology when perhaps arguably there are so many other things that we should be investing in? And so New Zealand, well, what's New Zealand's economy? New Zealand's economy is this, okay? It's cows. It's, or to a large extent, it's the primary sector. It's the dairy industry, the sheep industry, and other agricultural sectors. We rely heavily still on the agricultural sector. And so to put that in perspective, there are around about 6.26 million dairy cattle in New Zealand. So there are more cows than there are people. There's about 5 million people in New Zealand, and they produce about 21.1 billion litres of milk, of which 3% is utilized within New Zealand. So about 97% of that dairy production is exported. And the average amount that is received by a farmer for the milk solids that are produced from that milk is around about 7.2 New Zealand dollars per kilogram of milk solids. And the vagaries of Zoom, I now have something in the way. But carrying on, there's a but to this, right? The workhorse for many, many years in the New Zealand economy has been agriculture, but there is an environmental impact of all that agriculture. There's also a limit to how much you can grow that agricultural output. So if we want to maintain the lifestyle that we have in New Zealand, if we want to be a competitive nation in terms of our ability to service all the other things that we want to do, then we have to diversify that economy. And that's even more pertinent when you think how far away we are from our markets. So we're getting about $7 per kilogram of milk solid exporting dairy as exports. Our nearest market is over 2,000 kilometers away. We really are a very isolated nation in the middle of the Pacific. Australia is by far our closest market, but it's certainly not our biggest market. Our larger markets are much further away, and so there's the so-called tyranny of distance. We have to worry about shipping our goods, in this case we're talking about our dairy exports, a very long way in a global supply chain. And so with people becoming more and more conscious of food miles and those costs and associated environmental costs with export, then diversification of our economy becomes incredibly important. But I'm not originally from New Zealand. I grew up in the United Kingdom. I'm British, and so why did I move to New Zealand? And so, well, there are a number of reasons why I moved to New Zealand, and I was a lot younger. It was 25 years ago, almost exactly, that I moved to New Zealand, and there were other things that I enjoyed about New Zealand, which probably drove a lot of my interest in being based here in New Zealand. And it's a beautiful place. The neighbors are very friendly and lovely. So here we have some seals on rocks near Tairoa Head, near Dunedin, where I live. Here's some sea lions nearby as well. So the wildlife is fantastic. The scenery is amazing. It really is a wonderful place to live, and it puts on some quite incredible light shows. These are my kids enjoying an aurora at a beach last year. So these were compelling reasons for moving to New Zealand. And so we should never underestimate the things that we have that are able to attract people. But one of the other reasons that I moved to New Zealand was because of this man. This man is, or was, Dan Walls. So Dan was a student of Roy Glauber. He was one of the leaders in the development of quantum optics, and especially ideas around squeeze light. And so, unlike many people who go away, the diaspora of New Zealand, people like Rutherford, Marsden, Dan Walls came back to New Zealand after finishing his PhD at Harvard with Roy, and he ended up at the University of Waikato, and then later at the University of Auckland. And while he was at Waikato, he set up a number of schools in quantum science in New Zealand that attracted some of the great and the good from all across the world. And so this is one photo from, I think from the 1980s, of one of these symposia held at Waikato. So this was Quantum Optics 4. The other person who was key in this is pictured in the top left as an inset, so he wasn't actually in this photo, but was Crispin Gardner, who also joined Dan at the University of Waikato. In the bottom right-hand corner there, second from the right in the front row, is actually, I think there is Peter Zoller, so who've been known to many people as well as of one of the leading quantum opticians, and I think there may even be Gert Leutz in the middle there somewhere. But and so these people came from all over the world to come to these workshops that were organized by Dan and Crispin, and it really established a school of quantum optics in New Zealand. And so Dan and Crispin, and also experimentalist John Harvey, who's pictured in the front, Dan right in the middle in his lovely white suit there, John is two to the right of him, John Harvey. Together they established this school of laser physics and quantum optics in New Zealand, which really educated several generations of quantum opticians who then went on to be leading lights across not just New Zealand, but Australia and also the wider world. So I guess the takeaway message of that is my key first message, that people are important. So there were these few people, and in particular Dan Walls, who brought science to New Zealand and then educated people, trained people in New Zealand, and made New Zealand a place where quantum optics was done and a place where people went to go and do quantum optics. And so I met Dan in about 1997, 1998, I think, and he invited me to New Zealand. I went and visited him, spent some time here in New Zealand, had an absolutely fantastic time. And then when my contract where I was finished, I moved to New Zealand permanently. So it's the influence of a few key people that can attract more people to a country, retain people in the country, and then develop those skills that are needed to drive something forward in that country. And so that brings us on to the Dodd Walls Center. The Walls in that title, the Dodd Walls Center for Photonic and Quantum Technologies, honors Dan. Dan sadly died in 1999, very early in his 50s, just before I actually moved permanently to New Zealand. And so one of the things that we were able to build upon was his legacy of quantum optics and quantum science in New Zealand. And we were able to actually convince the New Zealand government that we had such strength in quantum physics in New Zealand that we were able to establish a so-called Centre of Research Excellence in New Zealand in 2015 that really took that legacy, took the people involved in that centre and tried to harness what we had developed in terms of quantum science in New Zealand into something bigger than the sum of the parts, so that we could really try and achieve something rather special in New Zealand in quantum science. And all of the time, the idea is that diversification of economy, the growth of the economy in the high-value manufacturing sector. And so this is actually a slide taken from my original pitch in 2013 when we were trying to get the money to develop the Dodd Walls Center. And so pictured in this are a couple of devices made by Southern Photonics. And so Southern Photonics was a company that was spun out by John Harvey, the guy that we saw earlier, and it made lasers. So the top item there is a fiber laser that is manufactured or was manufactured then by Southern Photonics and retailed for around about $10,000 a kilogram. So it sold for about $20,000. It was a couple of kilograms. And so sold for about $10,000 a kilogram. The second item there was actually a system analyzer that was constructed and sold by well, then it was still part of Southern Photonics, but went on to become a new company, which was Coherent, which later on went on to become a company, Quantify Photonics. And so this was about 5 kilograms, sold for about $100,000, so worked out around $20,000 per kilogram. Now, if you compare that to the $7 per kilogram of milk solids, you're obviously getting a lot more money per kilogram, and in fact, it's nearly worth its weight in gold. The retail, or the price of gold at the time, was around about $40,000 a kilogram. So we're up to around about the same order of magnitude as literally being worth your weight in gold. And at this point, that tyranny of distance has gone away, and you don't need that many high value manufacturing companies to actually start making a real difference to your economy. So, for example, the largest physical sciences based company in New Zealand is Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, and so they're one of New Zealand's most successful companies, and now are growing and doubling their size approximately every 7 years. So they build humidity-controlled environments for the medical industry, and so they're very specialist, very niche, but they sell to hospitals all over the world, and so have that specialist technology which is developed and provides an anchor in that high-value manufacturing sector. So the Dobb Walsh Centre was established as a centre of research excellence in New Zealand in 2015, as I say, and by 2020, when we were rebidding again, I put together some numbers on where the centre sat. We had 56 principal or associate investigators associated with the centre, 37 additional research staff, and around 120 graduate students at any one time in the centre. At that stage, we published 170 papers in 2020. We had an additional $10 million of external research income that was generated in 2020, and we had 3 new patents, 2 patent applications in process, and another 9 new invention disclosures in 2020, which ultimately go on to lead on to those sorts of developments that ended in companies like Quantify. And so by the time I stepped down as director of the Dobb Walsh Centre in 2023, we had graduated over 200 PhD students, approximately half of whom remained in New Zealand, adding to the New Zealand economy, not just through being involved in physics, although some of them have gone on to companies like OpenStar, which is a new fusion company in New Zealand working on a levitating dipole reactor, through to Rocket Labs, which is a launch facility and puts satellites into space out of New Zealand now. But they've also gone on to a variety of many varied different jobs, but everywhere they go, they lead to innovation. So my next point, I suppose, is really that it doesn't in some ways matter what the research is. As long as the research you're doing is world-class, it makes people want to be involved, be engaged. It makes people want to stay. Then you retain the best and brightest of your people rather than have them go overseas. And so I again think it's that element of engaging people that is absolutely imperative. Just to round out the Quantify story then, as I say, my second key message is people are important. But just to round out that Quantify story, Quantify was recently, earlier this year, acquired by Teradyne, a NASDAQ-listed company in the United States, for an undisclosed sum. And so you'll see that my original pitch that had that Quantify equipment in it, selling at $10,000 a kilogram, well, that 10, 12 years later is the overnight success that was reported when that company was acquired by Teradyne. And of course, is that a success if the company goes overseas? Well, the research elements of Quantify and the production elements associated with Quantify still at the moment remain in New Zealand. And so I'm very confident that this will lead to just future growth in the photonic sector there. And so this just grows our capacity, grows the ecosystem in New Zealand. And again, allows us to concentrate on the things that we want to do through things like the Dobb Wall Centre, which is not just train people, not just do research, but build career pathways for those people to remain within the country. And so the injection of extra capital from Teradyne into the photonic sector through the acquisition of Quantify Photonics only adds to the growth of that ecosystem, adds to the growth of possibility for our students and for our people, and hence that is what will grow the next string to the bow, if you like, of the New Zealand economy. And so that's essentially what we're trying to drive. And so I want to go back and just reflect on the agricultural sector for New Zealand. Again, I've mentioned the tyranny of distance, how far we are from our markets, but what allowed New Zealand to actually become an export economy based upon the agricultural sector was originally the sheep industry, the lamb, it was based on the wool industry. And so we sold wool mainly to the United Kingdom, and the meat associated with that was a bit of a byproduct of the wool industry. Now, in 1882, this ship, the SS Dunedin, was retrofitted with steam-powered refrigeration units. So it's still a sailing ship, but you can see the smokestack in the middle of that ship. And so this was steam-powered refrigeration, which allowed this ship, the SS Dunedin, to be the first ship to sail with frozen meat to the other side of the world. So it sailed from Dunedin, from Port Chalmers, the port in Dunedin, in 1882 to London. And so that trip obviously has to cross the equator to get from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. No ship had ever been able to take a shipment of frozen meat and cross the equator previously. There had been some shipments of meat from Canada to London, but they'd all gone through high latitudes, keeping the meat on ice during that period of time. So this was a huge success, and in the intervening 20 years, the turning of that byproduct from the wool industry into a viable export food product for the burgeoning cities in London after the Industrial Revolution, then that completely transformed New Zealand's economy. And it actually took New Zealand from a barely viable colony to a thriving nation with a GDP per head of population that I think was near, if not the highest, then very near the highest in the world by the end of the 19th century. And so that physical sciences, the refrigeration based upon steam power, was absolutely transformative in New Zealand's economy. And it only came some 50 to 60 years after, for example, Carnot's reflections on the motive power of fire, or Kelvin, the other person pictured here, or his work on temperature and thermodynamics. And so what I'm trying to say with this is that you don't have to be the inventors of technology. You don't have to be the people who come up with all the technology. But what you do have to have are people, in this case, the engineers, the people who understood how to put together the refrigeration based on steam. That you have to have that expertise, and you have to have that ability to take up the technology. And that's exactly where we are at the moment, I think, with quantum technologies. We're in a situation where it's absolutely imperative that we train people, we expose people to research so that they understand the technology, and we train a a cohort of people in our nations so that they can actually utilize the changes that are coming, that understand the new technology, understand where it can be applied, and then ensure that the benefit is captured and also the risks are avoided. So, for example, in New Zealand, we have, if you take Fisher and Paykel Healthcare that I mentioned earlier, they have design expertise that allows them to stay ahead of their field. But with coming machine learning, AI, improved design, improved potential through quantum technologies to actually improve design, maybe there's a risk to that company that they may be outstripped by another company that adopts quantum technology, quantum information processing in the relatively near future. There are, of course, other opportunities as well around drug design or other elements that could be developed in economies, and so being able to spot where those opportunities are and tailor those niches to your own individual country is absolutely imperative, I think. And so I'll come back to that idea that the absolute critical thing is not necessarily the research you're doing, but it's engaging people, making people want to learn, ensuring that you have people coming through your systems that understand the technology and are able to take up that technology for the future and utilize the opportunities that do arise for the benefit of your nation. And so that brings me to my last point. Something that I'm very proud of with the Dob Wall Center is that we educate a vast number of people, and we're engaged in education outreach across the Motu, across the country, also across the Pacific. And that is not just at a university level, it's not just at high school level, it's through every age group, through primary schools right down into here is some outreach that we were doing with a community kindergarten in Dunedin. And so the thing that's enabled us to do that is by a strong engagement with professional providers in that context, which in our case is partnership with centers of informal learning such as museums. And so we utilize that partnership to ensure that we're out and engaging people from the youngest ages to try and motivate their interest in science. So having outstanding science, having good research projects that attract people, make people want to stay, make people engaged, make people excited about the science we're doing, we keep the people in science, and then we can grow our scientifically literate population who can then grasp the opportunities as they arise, as things are developed overseas or within our own nations, and make sure that we can compete on a global scale. And one of the key things, I'm involved in some work with the OECD on future governance for quantum technologies. And one of the last things we want to see is an exacerbation of the digital divide in the world. And so to ensure that we have every capability to enjoy in the fruits of future technologies in quantum, we have to make sure that we're training the right people and that we're keeping our people in the country and giving them opportunities to thrive and make the best out of these technologies. And so on that, I will end with my third key message: people are important. And so there's a Māori of the indigenous population to New Zealand, a Māori whakatauki, which is an expression or a proverb, and it's he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. So I thank you for listening. Light matters. For New Zealand, it was a bit of a tagline that we had. It's not light as in unimportant, but light has been an important element. Starting when we started in 2015 for the International Year of Light, it's wonderful to join you in this fantastic event celebrating the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. Thank you for the invitation to talk to you, and I will try and stop there and stop my recording, and hopefully you will have everything from there. So thank you once more.
Thank you very much, David. That was really wonderful. And it really echoed a lot of things, but I think you, in your one talk, you put together all the key points that really we need to do. Have you considered moving to Ghana? I think everybody.
I'd love to. Yeah.
I think everybody would. Yeah. Oh, great. No, that's a very good.
Why didn't you invite me to come and be there in person? I should have come.
Well, I did, but it was a little bit late. But we'll get you next time. No, at any rate.
I'd love to come and visit.
Yeah, no, it would be great to come. Well, we'll provide another opportunity. So, and I'm glad you mentioned that you're going down to kindergarten, because that's, I was saying that Giorgio Parisi also was advocating going all the way down to kindergarten, maybe even before, and you actually put a nice point on it. So we'll take a couple questions here. Anybody who's got a question? Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just intrigued about the slide with the New Zealand, the money you spent and you were able to convince the New Zealand government to build a center. The question is, how are you able to convince the government to build a center with all that amount of money?
The key thing was we already had a history, and so we were able to actually point to the fact that we already, as a nation, punched above our weight. So we had the legacy of Dan Walls, Crispin Gardner, and so forth, and we were able to point to the people around the country that were already doing things in this area. And then we were able to suggest how we could take that forward into economic benefit. And the government took a punt on us, I guess. They actually believed us, and they realized that internationally there was a high respect for New Zealand. New Zealand clearly had this ability, and they believed that we could turn that into economic success. And over the next 10 years, we actually generated a number of companies, and we actually generated some economic return on that. We were also generating research income through other agencies where we were clearly showing that we were leading researchers in the country. And so you need that sort of kernel around which to base something. And again, it comes back to, hey tangata, it's people, right? You need to actually find a kernel of people that you can build something around and then grow something. And ultimately governments want to see return on investment, and so you have to make the investment case. That's as far as I can see, the only time you actually have success is when you can say there's going to be a return on investment here. You're not putting money into the National Ballet, right? This is not the things that it's nice to have as an economy. These are the things that are going to grow the economy and allow you to do other things. That's the key argument.
Right, and I think there is a figure for the return on investment on average around the world, right? I mean, it's every dollar put in or euro produces something else a little bit bigger for the economy.
Absolutely, like that. But that's true. Like I'm the director, I'm the chair of the board of a museum, and we make the same arguments around the investment in the museum. It returns in terms of our local economy through tourism. But like everyone's going to be making the same arguments, but what you want to be making the argument around is your export economy, and it's the high value elements of your export economy that you have to drive. Like that's what's going to actually change the bottom line for your government, and that's what ultimately they want to invest in.
Great. Okay, we got another question, and this is the last one because.
Good morning, and thank you for your talk. Very insightful. So my question is centered about the people aspect. So considering the fact that, you know, the saying you said, it's the people, right? And Australia is a diverse country with a very rich demographic of people. For example, you mentioned the Maori people and all that stuff. So my question is kind of about how you see engaging people from specific social, cultural contexts in a manner that will pique their interest in quantum technology, for instance, not necessarily applying maybe a one-size-fits-all, and I'm sure maybe you may have already addressed it in your slides, if I'm not mistaken, but, you know, kind of looking at educating the people to pique their interest in a manner that you think is relevant to their context. I don't know if that is in the pipeline, or, you know, if it's something that you're considering or have considered in the past. So I would like to learn more about how maybe you are approaching that.
That's a really good point. If Joe's going to give me a long enough time, I'm going to have a little anecdote here.
Okay.
I went on sabbatical leave to Paris to work with a friend, Ivan Castan. Ivan is a very formal French mathematical physicist, and I'm like my supervisor was a student of Phil Anderson. I grew up in a very sort of model-based sort of like, how does this work? Like, let's form a sort of picture and we'll fiddle with it and then we'll form the mathematics afterwards. Whereas Ivan was a really formal French. I'll write down the mathematics and deal with this. And so I went to work with him because it was a very different way of doing physics, and I really enjoyed learning from him, and it was a very deliberate thing on my behalf to go and learn from him. And my point is that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And when I look at the people across New Zealand that I work with in terms of the Maori population or anyone else, like, I would like to bring their perspective to looking at a physics problem before I've indoctrinated them with my way of doing physics. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, is that we embrace the perspectives of everyone so they can bring how they view a problem to science, and otherwise we're sort of cutting out a whole way of looking at science. And so there's lots of opportunities there to embrace different cultures, different ways of looking at things, different pasts. And that's a particular thing that we're facing in New Zealand, with understanding Mataranga Māori, which is Māori indigenous knowledge, and how that can actually be influential within the science that we do. And Australia, which is a very different country, by the way, but Australia is going through the same sort of processes with its indigenous knowledge and relationships with indigenous populations at the moment. So there's a whole bunch of things that we have to deal with there, but I think there is a whole precedent there, I think, actually from our own interactions across cultures. The way of doing physics in Russia, France, the United Kingdom was all very different, and we all actually can learn very different things from each other. One of my heroes was Freeman Dyson, who took the work of Julian Schwinger and Richard Feynman and showed that they were actually formally equivalent, even though that they're very different approaches to doing physics. So, you know, like there are all of these wonderful opportunities to do physics in different ways, and I think that's something that we should embrace, enhance, and look for in different cultures.
Okay, well, let's thank David again for a really wonderful talk. Thank you, David.
You're right. Thank you.